Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy Preston here, and this is my post-fight reaction to Shakur Stevenson absolutely schooling the living shit out of Teofimo Lopez. Yeah, man, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying, man, and shit. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, and shit like that. Man, honestly, I expected this fight and stuff like that, to being this way, and stuff like that. And honestly, Teo did fight his hardest, and stuff like that. He did fight his ass off. I do got to give my credit, I do got to give my hats off to Teofimo Lopez, and stuff like that for sure. I definitely got to give my hats off to Teofimo Lopez, and stuff like that for sure, and stuff like that, and, because he got in there and overall, he definitely did show and stuff like that, that he's still a tricky fighter because, because he was still able to catch Shakur Stevenson. And being able to catch Shakur Stevenson isn't something that's very easy. So if you're able to bait Shakur Stevenson, into being able to get punches in, like how William Zepeda did, or, be able to sneak punches in like how Teofimo Lopez did. I mean, I got to give respect of where it's due, where it's due, man. And that's the thing and shit like that, you know what I mean? And overall and stuff like that, like I just feel like, that Shakur Stevenson, like I feel like he's gonna be just that type of guy, man, that I don't know if he gonna lose, man. Just like almost like what I said with Terrence Crawford, man. I just don't know if he could lose, man, and shit like that, you know what I mean? Because at the same time and shit like that, you know what I mean? Like it's just the way of how it's just the way of how athletic he is, the way of how, like, in the main thing what I've really seen from him in this fight, of what really is the biggest attribute with Shakur Stevenson. I know he has a lot of speed and everything and boxing skill and all that, but the biggest thing what is his biggest attribute is how smart he has, how much ring IQ he has. Like, he has one of the highest ring IQs in the sport of boxing. Like, I'm just saying, and shit like that. Like, he has one of the highest ring IQs in the sport of boxing. He makes every single fucking fight look easy as hell to winning, bro. Every fucking fight. Like, guarantee, bro, if Gervonta Davis went against Teofimo Lopez in this fight and shit like that, you know what I mean? Like, Gervonta would have not been able to school this dude. And I swear on my life that Gervonta would have not been able to school this dude like how Shakur did. Shit, I don't know. Like, Gervonta, like, I would have been kind of tempted into, like, I wouldn't be shocked that Teo would have even beat Gervonta. You know what I mean? Like, even though, like, I'm not going to give my full prediction on that, and shit like that, you know what I mean? But I'm just saying, and shit like that, you know what I mean? So, literally, man, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Because I think that would be a good fight and stuff like that between Gervonta and Teofimo Lopez and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And maybe I should share my opinion on that video another time and stuff like that, so, yeah, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? So, overall, man, and shit like that, like, it's just, that's the thing, man, and shit, like, this dude, Shakur Stevenson, bro, has one of the highest ring IQs in boxing, bro. Like, literally, bro, and shit like that. Like, even, like, incomparable with people like Terrence Crawford, incomparable to people like Alexander Usyk, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying and shit like that, but but also most importantly, I'm kind of comparing his ring IQ to the one and only great Floyd Money Mayweather, or Pretty Boy Floyd Money Mayweather, whatever the fuck you like it is and shit, like the version of Floyd Mayweather and shit. He compares a lot with his ring IQ to Floyd Money Mayweather, bro, and shit like that. You know what I mean? It's just the way of how he can just neutralize any attack move with not even with a punch. He could literally do that shit with just moving his feet around, bro, making you miss. Literally, bro. I'm just saying, bro, and shit like that. Like this dude Shakur Stevenson, bro, is a fucking is a one of a kind fighter, bro. And not a one of a kind fighter, but I'm just saying I mean style with his type of style, yeah, but I mean he fights a lot like Floyd Mayweather. I mean at the same time Floyd, I mean they kind of fight a little different and stuff like that, but you see a lot of comparison with Floyd Mayweather and Shakur Stevenson. And I'm just saying, and I know, Shakur would and I know Shakur, compares himself to Terrence Crawford, and I see a lot of Terrence Crawford into him too, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? With his slick footwork and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Because his footwork is definitely more different from Floyd and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But the way of how he just makes people miss every punch and make them miss every single fucking attack. I mean, Terrence does that too. And Terrence has great defense too. But I'm just saying and shit like that, it's just like that. I'm comparing him to Floyd Mayweather, bro. And shit like that. How everybody in this, how much I love Terrence Crawford. Like he's like top top three or probably maybe arguably my favorite boxer of all time. And stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. And I'm just saying I'm a big fan of Terrence Crawford and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But it's just the way of how he just makes people easily miss, bro. Not even Terrence Crawford has the fucking defense like Shakur Stevenson. That's the problem. Like even though Terrence has great defense, and shit like that, But the one thing, the difference between Shakur and Terrence is a guy that more takes chances into punching, Shakur Stevenson strictly sticks to one of his moves to do damage and shit like that, and that's to be a slick boxer, and shit like that. Terrence will be a slick, but then also will be rugged, at times of when he needs to, and take punches and stuff like that, So Terrence is more of like a risk taker than Shakur Stevenson and shit like that. But the one thing that I've been very proud of with Shakur Stevenson has been taking way more chances on actually punching, and he's actually not a boring fighter anymore, man. I think he's honestly a very entertaining fighter and stuff like that. You know what I mean? He has great defense. I mean, I know it just, but the most important part with him is that he has great is that he's punching niggas, bro. He's not running away. He's actually wanting to. He's actually fighting and stuff. He's mixing combinations and shit. That cut on Tio's eye and shit like that. Opened up because of how many times he kept tagging at Tio's eye and stuff like that. Because I feel like Tio and stuff like that. Swells up really easily. Because I feel like Tio has taken a lot of damage in his career and shit like that. You know what I mean? A lot of damage, especially in that fight against George Kambosos. He really took a lot of damage against George Kambosos. He definitely took a lot of chances against George Kambosos. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, he definitely took a lot of chances, or definitely got hit a lot against George Kambosos. But honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I might need to rewatch that fight. But I felt like Tio still won that fight. I know he looked sloppy as hell and shit like that, but I still thought I still thought Teofimo won that fight and shit like that. Maybe I need to rewatch it again and shit like that. You know what I mean? But but I'm just saying and shit. But it was a close fight. It was a tilt for tilt fight and shit like that. You know what I mean? So maybe I do need to go back and rewatch that fight and shit like that. You know what I mean and stuff. But when I first scored that fight, I thought Teofimo won. My dad thought that George Kambosos didn't. He thought it was a draw, or he thought that George Kambosos did enough to win. I thought it was a draw. But then I thought it was a draw. I know I said, I thought it was, Teofimo winning, but I thought it was a draw or Teofimo Lopez slightly edging it, but at the same time, I mean, he did get dropped, but Tio did win those rounds and stuff like that and started coming back, but I don't know, man, but like I like at the same time. I mean, George Kambosos did drop him and stuff like that, like and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like maybe like, but maybe like I could share that for another time. But I'm just saying at the same time and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing and shit. It's just Shakur Stevenson, man. You are one of a kind of a fighter, bro, and just congratulations on your victory, man, and shit like that, and just keep on doing what you're doing, bro. And shit like that. You know what I mean? Like I'm just saying, and stuff like that. Because literally, man, and stuff like that. And oh yeah, the biggest thing what I was trying to say is that Teofimo gets cut up very easily, man. But the one thing is that like, what happened with that cut is that basically like is that Shakur Stevenson he basically created that by creating a like a puffed up eye on his eyelid, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And he basically he basically was puffing up his eyelid and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And then he kept tagging the eyelid with the jab all day long. He kept jabbing that eyelid and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And then eventually he split it open, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing. That's just like what happens in boxing and shit like that. Or I mean, it could have been a headbutt. I don't think there was any headbutt. And they would have, especially with some that would have opened up like that. It would like they would have said something of a headbutt, and shit like that. Like that's the thing and shit like that. But I don't know if it. But maybe I have to relook at shit and see if it was actually a headbutt or if it was a. I'm like 90% sure that was that was just Stevenson just jabbing out Stevenson look, Stevenson jabbing out Teofimo Lopez's eye. I just like that's what it was just jabs to the eye, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. It just I just feel like not just Shakur just schooled the absolute living shit out of Teofimo Lopez, but he beat the shit out of him, bro. Like I'm not gonna lie, bro. Like he beat the shit out of him in this fight, bro. Because I feel like this fight looks tight, built like an ass beating. Like I'm not gonna lie, bro. And shit like that. Like I like that fight looked like a tad bit like an ass beating. But the one thing that I am gonna say, and stuff like that, with Teofimo and stuff like that, is that like I respect him a lot and shit like that, because at the same time and shit like that, it's like, you know, like, he apologized and stuff like that to the black community and shit like that, which is me, to everybody who's black and stuff like that, who has black in them and shit like that, you know what I mean? And stuff like that, and basically like he basically apologized and stuff like that, about what he said and stuff like that, and that in that like he respects the culture because he understands about this about where we went through with slavery, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, so and I respect you, Tio, and I forgive you. It's just please don't say that again and stuff like that because that's very offensive, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So yeah, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But I'm just saying, and shit like that. You know what I mean? But basically and stuff like that. Like this was a good win for Shakur Stevenson. I thought every single like I don't really gotta I can and shit like that. Because basically the whole point, dictator of this fight for Shakur Stevenson was just utilizing the jab. He wasn't really being as active as how he was against Zepeda, but like I was kind of expecting. Like I wasn't expecting him to be really as active as Zepeda. I was expecting him to be more active and him to be more assertive, and shit like that. You know what I mean? But not to be as like the way of how it was with Zepeda. You know what I mean? Like I I felt like like exactly like how he would have fought in this fight. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. And basically basically that's the thing and shit like that. So and he fought beautifully. And basically what he did was that he utilized the jab, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And overall and stuff like that. When he was in range, when he was in far range, he didn't really utilize. I mean, he did utilize the right hand and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But that's whenever Tio wanted to try to decide into coming in into trying to like throw a punch or try to like lean forward or something. Because the one thing that Teofimo was doing a lot in this fight was leaning forward, on the on the front foot and shit like that, like or where what he would do is that like he would go and then lean and lean his back foot to and put it his back foot as his front foot and shit like that, and that's the one thing in boxing and shit when especially when you're going against a person like Shakur Stevenson, that's a big no that you can't do, and shit like that. You know what I mean? Because that's somewhere he could fucking just drop an uppercut on you, three of them and shit like that, and drop you, and shit like that. Like Shakur was honestly just being nice, honestly, because I feel like Shakur honestly had a lot of chances where he could have stopped Teofimo, and shit like that. Because Shakur is so skilled and shit like that that he can stop you whenever he wants to. Like I have like not whenever he wants to. Maybe that's a little too over dramatic, but I'm just saying I think he could stop you, but to like he could stop anybody basically. Like he could stop any fighter he wants to, and shit like that. I'm not numbering of any round, but I'm saying that like he could stop any fighter he wants to. It's just more of about how he knows how to take that initiative in that fight and shit like that. You know what I mean? And sometimes that's something that is difficult to knowing how to do and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Because it's just more because it's a lot of assuming and shit like that. Because you're just assuming that like oh like this fighter's about to do this and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And stuff. So if they do this and stuff, I could maybe try to go the instant, but you don't know how the fighter's gonna come into it, into a fight. So the smart game plan is to fight into a game plan that already got you to where you're at, and shit like that. You know what I mean? And that's to stick and move from the outside and stuff like that. And consistently utilize that jab, and shit like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. And yeah, and shit like that. But but yeah, but basically with with Stevenson, he was utilizing his jab and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Uh, he was utilizing his jab and stuff like that. And basically utilize his jab, and he was kind of just doing that to pick his mark, and shit like that on whenever he wanted to, like kind of like find his moment and shit like that. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. But and that's the thing, is that like that was kind of his pinpoint marker and stuff like that was that jab, and shit like that, like that was kind of his pinpoint, his pinpoint marker and shit like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. But it was the jab, but then his right hand was his confuser. Be like, okay, but then I got this and shit like that. And Shakur, even that jab hurts, so you want to stay away from that jab. But when he cracks you with that, you're like, fuck, damn, that hurt. Like I don't want to get dropped, by especially like against Stevenson, like that would he would get abducted a star and shit like that on BoxRec and shit, like if he got dropped by Shakur Stevenson, like I'm just saying, and shit like that, like if BoxRec seen that shit, oh my gosh, bro, they would probably would have abducted, but I hope they didn't abduct the point like now though at all, and shit like that, because I think Teofimo still deserves to be a 5-star in my opinion on BoxRec, and stuff like that, you know what I mean, or he's gonna still prove that he's a 5-star on BoxRec, and stuff like that, you know what I mean, because he is a 5-star, and stuff like that. It's just he lost this to somebody who was a better fighter and stuff like that, but I am going to grab myself a pop, so and shit like that, cause yo. Excuse me, guys. Excuse me, guys and girls. That wire, this wires. There we go. And we back. But yeah, man, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So that's the thing, man, and shit like that. With Shakur Stevenson, man, he's the one of a kind fighter, man, and I'm just saying, man, and shit like that. That boy is a one of a kind of a fighter and shit. And it's just like, and I'm just saying, man. But basically, he was utilizing the jab, and then he was using the confuser as the right hand. But usually but then also he was just more just kind of just knocking Teal off balance with his footwork and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. But honestly, with Teal, he really couldn't land shit in this fight. I mean, he started landing stuff later on, but it's just more of like I feel like the biggest thing that Teal wasn't doing right in this fight, he was not hitting the body of Shakur Stevenson. But at the same time, the one thing with Shakur is that he was still being able to know how to get out of range of that. But whenever Tio still found to hit Shakur back to the body and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like like you know, like he had success, you know what I mean? But it's just after that he was like, okay, and then he kind of just didn't really kind of stick to that plan, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. I felt like if he was able to stick to like more stick to the body shots and shit like that, I feel like he could have done a little bit more, but I feel like he would have still got dominated regardless. And the reason why and shit like that is because Shakur would have found a way to getting out of that and stuff. And once he gets a way to getting out of that, and even if he would have still hit that body, like if he was hitting that body, like Shakur probably would have still would have done something to hit him back, to still win that round, and then eventually get out of that, and then get back to the range of what he was doing, and shit like that. You know what I mean? Because that's what happens when you fight a fighter that has such high ring IQ. Because that's the number one thing in boxing that will win you any fight is high ring IQ. And shit like that. Overpower and shit like that. Like what's more important than power in the sport of boxing is ring IQ. You know what I mean? And I feel like I learned that possibly today. And shit like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit. Because Tio had power. And Tio knows how to land with that power too. But at the same time and shit like that, he fought against somebody with high ring IQ, and both fighters are technically on the same level. But then Shakur proved so. I'm just saying. I feel like in this fight right here, I feel like this fight's I know styles all make fights and shit like that. You know what I mean? That's something that's also an important fact. But but at the same time and shit like that, we have two fighters that are two neutralizers, and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like Tio knows how to neutralize people and dominate, and shit like that. Or at least like when somebody might have a success, but then later on, that's when he starts dominating and shit like that. Shakur is a pure dominant fighter. And I feel like that's kind of just the reason why I picked him and why he won this fight. But at the same time, I just feel like it's just he's a special fighter, man, and shit like that. It's just styles make fights, man, and shit like that. And I'm just saying, shit like that. Styles make fights, man. And if Shakur dominates every fight like this, man, he might be better than Floyd Mayweather. Because the one thing with Floyd, he did not dominate every single fight, because he still had, fights where, where fights where he didn't fully win and shit. Like, wait, he did win, but it was a rough win and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like against like the Castillo I think was it, I forgot it. I don't know his first name, but I know his last name is Castillo. But then Jose Luis Castillo. That's his name, Jose Luis Castillo. Um, basically, even though Jose Luis Castillo was a really, really fucking good fighter back in his day, but I'm just saying this would be kind of something similar to that, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's something very similar to that actually, and shit like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit, But in that Castillo fight, even though I thought that Mayweather won that fight, and stuff like that, I felt like Mayweather did enough to win. Even though a lot of people thought that Jose Luis Castillo won that fight, and shit like that. But I feel like Floyd Mayweather, the one thing he did, and shit like that, was he threw more punches than Luis Castillo. And you know why he threw more punches? because when Luis Castillo wasn't throwing a punch, he was tagging Luis Castillo to the body, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And he was consistently jabbing Luis Castillo to the body, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. And that's why I thought Floyd won that fight, but he barely got through in that fight, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And then that Marcos Maidana fight and shit like that. Well, honestly and shit like that, I feel like Floyd. I thought in both fights, I thought Floyd clearly won in both fights, and stuff like that. Maybe I have to rewatch it again, but I feel like Floyd should have gotten a clear decision in both of those fights, honestly, and stuff like that, So, like, maybe it could have been bad judging and shit like that, you know what I mean? And also, too, I like what was really shitty judging for Floyd Mayweather was when he fought against Canelo Alvarez, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And again, and when he fought Canelo Alvarez, he won every single round against. Maybe Canelo won like 2 rounds or maybe 1 round and shit like that. You know what I mean? But basically Floyd dominated that whole fight. And shit like that. You know what I mean? Like I'm just saying. Like Floyd dominated that whole entire fight. And stuff like that. And that's the thing and shit like that. Like he dominated that whole fight, but then they still had that fight being a majority decision. Like I'm just saying, like they still had that fight being a majority decision. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit. And I don't understand how they had that fight a majority decision, but they had it a majority decision. But Floyd won clearly basically all of those rounds. And shit like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. So overall and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like with that point of what I made where Floyd had some questionable decisions and stuff like that, not all of those decisions were 100%. Not all opinions were. I mean, everybody's entitled to having their own opinion, especially when it comes down to the Luis Castillo fight. I mean, a Jose Luis Castillo fight. I mean, everybody has their own opinion and stuff like that, But I mean, in that's the thing and shit. Like everybody has their own opinion, but I remember watching every single round of that fight and shit. Like maybe I have to rewatch that fight again, But I felt like Floyd clearly won that fight though, and stuff like that. Like I know he was getting hit, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But at the same time and shit like that, like it's just like, it's just like Floyd literally was outboxing him, and was hitting him to the body, and was still outboxing him during the early rounds and stuff like that. And then the later rounds was when Luis Castillo started coming back and started actually winning rounds and stuff. But it was still competitive and shit like that, and stuff like that, But but I maybe I have to rewatch that fight and shit like that. But I have to rewatch that fight again. But I felt like Floyd won that fight. It was a close fight, but I felt like Floyd. If it comes down to a winner in that fight, I felt like it's gonna go to the champ of Floyd Mayweather, and shit like that. You know what I mean? But anyways, and shit like that. Back on topic with this and shit. I was just saying in topic of that, Shakur Stevenson. He has all unanimous decisions. Not even a majority decision. Not even a split decision. All unanimous decisions. All unanimous decisions. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. You know what I mean? So yeah, and shit like that. But and yeah, and shit like that. But again, like I was trying to say, judging back in the day wasn't as how it was like how it is now, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, like judging is more fair than how it was back in the day, and stuff like that, and that's the thing and stuff like that, But overall, very good win from Shakur Stevenson. And, I'm very proud of Shakur. He boxed well in this fight, and stuff like that. He did what he did, and stuff like that. Utilized his footwork and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And utilized good ring IQ and stuff like that, And the one thing I also do see in this fight, what he does do really good too, is that he also has a lot of he also generates a lot of power and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit, like, like Shakur Stevenson, and shit like that. Like Shakur Stevenson generates a lot of power, and shit like that, a lot of power, and shit like that. Not a lot of I'm fucking sorry. Not like I'd like beep, but I'm just saying like he doesn't generate a lot of power. But I'm just saying like at the same time, like he generates power where he should be getting respected, where it's like he doesn't have like a pillow fist and shit like that, like, and because the one thing is that Shakur knows how to crack, man. Like he designed that cut on Teofimo Lopez's eye, and that cut doesn't come out of nowhere, bro. And shit like that. You know what I mean? Because Arnold Barboza couldn't do that, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. So I'm just saying, and stuff like that. So and and Shakur Stevenson was able to do it. So utilize great, technique, generated power. You know what I mean? And overall and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Yeah, man, and shit like that, and yeah, bro, and shit, like Shakur Stevenson, you did your thing, man, and shit like that, and now and stuff like that, you know what I mean? What is next for Shakur Stevenson? And also, I did get this prediction right and stuff like that, and stuff like that, and yeah, and shit like that, And honestly, I got all the predictions right, all the predictions right. Or did I get all the predictions right? No, or yes, I did. So the Jarrell Miller fight I got right. The Bruce Carrington fight I got right. And the Keyshawn Davis fight I got right. And then I got the shit. Yeah, man. So I was 100% on these fights, man. And stuff like that. You know what I mean? So let's go. Congratulations to me, man, because that's an accomplishment, to me and stuff like that, and stuff like that, because I got to do better and shit, and stuff like that, because I got to, because I'm about to grow with this YouTube channel and shit like that, and shit, and, start growing, make some money and shit like that, make business. I'm like, I want to get rich, bro, and shit like that, you feel me? And that's the thing and shit like that, and that's the goal, and shit like that, and that's what's going to happen and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, but, but yeah, man, and stuff like that, but, what's next for Shakur Stevenson? What's next for Shakur Stevenson is there's a lot of fights out there that he could fight, to be honest with you. I mean, there's Devin Haney, there's Richardson Hitchens, there's Dalton Smith. Shit, I mean, he could fucking try to fight Subriel Matias, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit, but I feel like the fight that makes the most sense, I feel like, like, is, I don't know, and shit like that, like, because, I mean, there is Richardson Hitchens, but then there is Devin Haney, but, but at the same time and shit like that, Conor Ben, that has to be the next fight, Conor Ben. Even though Conor Ben is a lot bigger than Shakur Stevenson, but I don't really think it's gonna really matter, and shit like that, because I feel like Shakur is gonna do what he does and shit like that, Like I want him to fight somebody that's more in his division actually, instead of Conor Ben. I mean, if that's who he decides to going and fighting and shit, and go up to super welterweight and shit like that, but it's just, like I just feel like that's like not say like I like overall. I'm gonna say this: if they fought each other, I'm favoring Shakur Stevenson. Shakur's way too skilled for me to not favor, and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like size is just a number and shit like that. To skill, and IQ, and shit like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing, and shit like that. So yeah, even though like the one thing is that like Conor Ben is actually a very smart fighter and shit like that. But at the same time and shit like that, like He's too slow for it. If Teofimo is too slow for Shakur Stevenson, Connor Ben is gonna be too slow for Shakur Stevenson. Like, I'm just saying, it's just he throws way too wild for Shakur Stevenson and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like I'm just saying, and shit like that. So I'm just saying right now and shit like that. You know, of course, I would do a prediction and shit like that. You know what I mean? And honestly, it depends on maybe but I just feel like it just man, it's like it would be hard for me not to favor Shakur Stevenson in that fight, man. It would be hard for me not to favor Shakur Stevenson in any fight, and shit like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. And even against Gervonta, I'm picking Shakur over like I ain't gonna lie though and shit like that. I might be picking Shakur Stevenson over Gervonta Davis, man. And shit like that. Like I'm just saying, like I might be picking Shakur Stevenson over Gervonta Davis. You know what I mean? Like I'm just saying, like I just feel like Shakur is more skilled than Gervonta. And shit like that. You know what I mean? Like Gervonta, like even though Gervonta's quick and he knows how to land, but it just how can he land when he can't land? You know what I mean? Like that's the thing and shit. Like it's just like I'm just saying like. It just Shakur has such good defense, man. Such good footwork. Like everything, bro. Like it just that dude knows. I don't mean to glaze, bro, but it's hard not to because it just everything is true, bro. And shit like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. It is it's hard for me not to favor Shakur Stevenson in any fight. And shit like that. Even against Richardson Hitchens. And shit like that. You know what I mean? And the one thing that I kind of see in Shakur Stevenson, I feel like Shakur Stevenson does pretty good against fighters that are more taller than him. And shit like that. And Richardson Hitchens is like 5'11", like Shakur Stevenson or 5'11", or where he's like 6 feet or some shit. Cause he's like more like taller, cause he's more taller. Richardson Hitchens and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But yeah, and shit like that. But I think he's like but I don't know and shit like that. You know what I mean? And shit like that. But at the same time, I mean, like it just like even against Richardson Hitchens, man, it just like I just feel like he would outwork Richardson Hitchens. It's just all of these fighters, man, and shit like that. It's like you never know, man, and shit like that. But it's just after I seen what it would like from this, man, it's just because I was expecting to see if this would be a good T would be the one guy that would actually make this a tough fight, or make it like somewhat competitive, and shit like that. You know what I mean? Not even fucking Teofimo Lopez can do that shit, man. Like I'm just saying and shit like that, and it's just like, and I'm just saying, man, and shit, so. Yeah, and shit like that. It's just Shakur keeps proving how fucking good he is, man. It's just he keeps on proving of how good he is, man. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, so I'm just saying, and shit like that, so that's just all I gotta say, man, and shit like that, But overall, good fight. Great fight card. And yeah. But overall, I am going to wrap this video up and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. You know what I mean? I am going to be wrapping this video up and stuff like that, And yeah, and stuff like that, But thank y'all for watching this video. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. I'm Preston. Peace out, y'all.